Good morning. I'm Tommy Johnson. I'm here with the Archives Committee of the Shreveport Bar Association, and we have Paul Carmouche this morning. We want to conduct an interview, Paul, of your history in Shreveport and the practice of law. And if you would, state your full name for us.
It's Paul Joseph Carmouche, and happy to be here. Glad to give whatever input I can.
Well, good. Why don't you tell us where you grew up in your hometown?
I grew up in a tiny town called Napoleonville. It's right around Donaldsonville and Thibodaux on Bayou Lafourche. In fact, I used to tell people, if you take Highway 1 from here to Grand Isle, you're going to drive through Napoleonville.
Okay. Did you move anywhere, or is that where you were born and raised?
That's where I was born and raised. The only moving would have been to go to college.
Okay. And your parents, what did they do?
They were both educators. My father ended up as superintendent of schools in Assumption Parish. People up here would say, it's a Catholic school. I said, no, it's a parish. It's a public school, Assumption Parish. But I tell them it could have been a Catholic school because everybody there was Catholic.
And so you attended high school at
Assumption High School.
Assumption High School. Yeah. Do you participate in any high school activities, sports or such?
Yeah. I was always little, but I wanted to play football more than anything in the world. I finally got big enough my senior year of high school to make the team. And we ended up going to the state championship. We lost in the finals, but it was interesting. I know I was president of the junior class, but I participated in everything. It's a little town. Everybody knew everybody. Back in the great days of segregation, Assumption was the white school, high school. J.W. Reed was the black high school, so it was still back then, and that changed shortly after.
And when did you finish high school?
1961.
Okay. And where did you go to college?
I started at what was then USL, now ULala, and after 2 years of bad grades, my father said, you coming home, and you're going to commute to Nicholls State, and I ended up graduating undergraduate at Nicholls State.
Okay. And what was your degree in undergrad?
It was in, I guess what they used to call pre-law liberal arts, because I was getting ready to go to law school at the time, and I ended up at Loyola Law School in New Orleans.
Okay. How did you determine you wanted to go to law school?
It's funny how just some comment can affect your whole life. I had a teacher that taught geometry at Assumption High, and I was bad at math, every math except geometry. And she told me, she said, geometry, you have to do one thing and then the next thing and the next thing. She said, it's got to think like a lawyer. She said, maybe you ought to think about being a lawyer. And that's all it took.
Did you have any mentors from Napoleonville in regards to law?
None that I could really call mentors, but there are a number of lawyers that came from Napoleonville. Pappy Treese was the one that lived in Napoleonville. Judge Henry Politz is a Napoleonvillian. He grew up there, his family. And David Klotz, whose daddy was the mayor of Napoleonville, Sammy Klotz. But so there were a number of people from there that were lawyers. They were, of course, had all moved on by the time I was coming up.
Right. So you went to Loyola Law, and when did you finish there?
I finished at Loyola in 1969, 66 to 69. Enjoyed law school in New Orleans. It wasn't as dangerous as it is today, I imagine, but it was fun. I made a lot of friends there, and that I knew in the future. But being a Loyola lawyer, when I moved to Shreveport, I was one of very few Loyola lawyers in Shreveport. Everybody else had gone to LSU.
That is quite true. Very few Tulane grads up
That's
here
right.
also.
That's right.
So, well, how did you arrive to Shreveport? I mean, what brought you here?
Well, the plan was, and future plans never seem to work out in professional. A plan was to go to work with Talbot, Sotil, and Carmouche. Don Carmouche is still there. Bert Talbot was the DA for many years in Assumption Parish and also had a law practice. And I was supposed to go there after I graduated. And at the same time that I graduated, the senior partner in that firm died. And they told me, they said, look, what we'll do is we'll get you a job in Baton Rouge. And we'll bring you in as soon as we get all this partnership stuff cleared up. And at the meantime, I had an offer to a job from my wife was from Shreveport. And I had an offer to come up to Shreveport to work for this small firm called Hendrick, Fant, and Bain. And they had made an offer. And so when they said, we can get you a job in Baton Rouge, bring you in later, I said, well, I'll just go to Shreveport for a year. And then because that's where my wife is from. And I ended up, that was in '69, and I've been here ever since.
So, of the Hendricks Bain law firm, would you give me their names?
Yeah, Ruvian Hendricks was an old retired city court judge, a strange guy, character. He used to say that he had, I could imitate him some, he would say, well, I went to Louisiana Baptist College. I studied for the law and took the bar. Back then, you could study for the law. You didn't have to graduate from law school. And he had passed it, apparently. And then Jack Fant was there, Hendrick Fant. Fant's daddy, Mayor Fant of Shreveport. He was, I was thinking, man, this is the mayor's son's firm. I mean, it'll be a good place to go. Troy Bain was the other partner. And Fred Sexton, who later became a judge, had just left to go to be an assistant DA here in Caddo. And it was funny because I got up here thinking I had this great little firm to go to work for. Shortly after arriving, Jack Fant left, and his daddy got him an appointment on the bench. And then Troy apparently looked around and said he left also. And it was me and this old judge who had no idea how to practice law. He had his judge's retirement, so he didn't care if he made anything. I knew nobody out here, had no clients, no connections, and it was a struggle. Let me tell you, if my wife hadn't been teaching school, we'd have been homeless, but it was a tough go for a while.
Right. And who were you married to at that time?
I was married to Margaret Looney, who has since passed, and she was a teacher, school teacher. I had met her in New Orleans. She was teaching at one of the schools in New Orleans, although she's from, in the Looney family, is all from up here. She moved up here and taught school at the time, Midway Junior High. She and a number of her friends who ended up at Midway. And in fact, one of her students was Cody Mayo.
Who also became an assistant DA.
Yeah, that's right.
So, how long were you at that law firm?
It was about 3.5 years or so. And as I said, we had very few clients and clientele, and making the payroll was difficult. And I was always looking around for some place to make some money on the side. And it was during that period of time when the whole legal profession changed, when the Miranda decision and some of the other decisions that said everybody that has a possibility of going to jail, has to have a lawyer. If you can't afford one, the court will appoint one. So I ended up taking a job at Shreveport City Court as the public defender, assigned to all the people who would come in. I remember we'd go there on a Thursday. I would go there on a Thursday and get assigned maybe 30, 40 cases of misdemeanor cases. And we'd work them out, and stayed there for a while doing that. And then I got promoted to the district court. And the same sort of thing. All the misdemeanor cases I would get assigned to. And I remember one day that Gene Bryson, who was a longtime judge and an assistant DA at the time, they had noticed that they thought it was something. A lot of them, the clients, would get them and we'd plead, and I looked like I knew what I was doing. And Gene came to me one day and said, you know, we got an opening in the DA's office, and somebody mentioned that you might want to prosecute. Now, because you're doing all this defense and you know a good bit about the criminal side, and I immediately accepted that because they were offering me $18,000 a year to come to work there. And that was like all the money in the world because I was starving. So I came to the DA's office, and
What year was that, Paul?
it was about 1973, I think, and yeah, and I was the 8th of 8 assistants. We were lined up by statute, I think, at that time, and I was the 8th assistant DA.
Do you recall others in the office that time?
Oh yeah. Well, of course, Gene Bryson was there, and then Charles Lindsay was the top dog. He wasn't the first assistant, but a guy named Albert Lutz was the first assistant. Fred Sexton was there. Dan Legrand had Larry Johnson, who I later ran against for the DA's office, was there. We had a nice group of guys, but back then, trying cases wasn't key. I mean, moving cases was important, and you have to realize that during that period we were going through this system of, not that the Supreme Court had made the DAs and the criminal justice system handle the load that every defendant that has the possibility faces jail had to have a lawyer. So we're going through that, and we're getting court-appointed lawyers. The judges would have a list of everybody in the bar to appoint on
There was
cases.
no public defender at that time.
None. They were, and that was something that I later got involved in. But after 3 years in the DA's office and trying a lot of cases, felony, misdemeanor, everything. I can remember being in court all day trying on misdemeanor day, trying cases. But we tried an awful lot of. I had trials of an awful lot of cases, and some. I don't know if I tried any murder cases as an assistant. I probably did, but then after about 3 years from the DA's office, from me entering the assistant as an assistant, I had trying to make sure I can remember all this a long time ago, but the Shreveport bar decided that, I guess it was Shreveport, decided that we're going to start a public defender office. We're going to have a full-time public defender office, and that way, of course, the civil lawyers in Shreveport were very happy about that because they were getting appointed to, I remember having a case with an elderly lawyer who did nothing but loan closings. And he was appointed on a murder case, and I was the assistant DA trying it. And I remember having to prepare the motions for him and say, look, you just fill this in for your client name and file it, because he didn't know what to do. Yeah. And we were operating that way. And then when they started the public defender office, and I assumed the bar was behind that, the Shreveport bar, because the civil lawyers didn't want to be appointed on criminal cases that they didn't know anything about.
Right.
So, and they were looking around for somebody to run the public defender office, and I got offered that job, and I took it. And I left the DA's office, took the public defender job. I remember a lot of lawyers saying, well, you can't switch sides like that. I said, well, look, here's what I believe. My philosophy is everybody's entitled to competent defense, and everybody's competent. You need to have lawyers that know what they're doing. And because I believe in the system, I can represent somebody,
Yeah.
even if I believe they're guilty. I can represent them because that's what our Constitution and our laws require. So I got hired, and I had the ability at the time, our budget that we had, to hire an assistant. And one of my first lawyer was Bill Lowe. Bill was quite a character and a good lawyer.
Yes.
Later ended up in the Court of Appeal running the staff, I think. But we did that, Bill and I. Sue Webb, who was my secretary, it seems like for life, came with me from the DA's office. And I'm drawing a blank on the other lady that was there. I had 2 secretaries, 2 lawyers. That was the office. We got appointed all the felony appointments. And
Where was y'all's office at the time?
at the time, we were in, we were in what was called the Rico Brewster building.
Okay.
It's now a parking lot, but it's right. It was cat a corner to the courthouse. And I'm not sure if we got those offices for free, but I know there was an oil and gas company that was moving out, and we got their space, and they left us a bunch of tin desks and chairs and stuff, and so we were kind of putting together whatever we could.
Yeah. So, yeah, and you, John Richardson was the DA when you were there, correct?
Yes, he was, and John had been DA for 18 years. I mean, well, not at that time, but he was coming on 18 years. He had been an assistant for 18 years before that.
How was he to work for?
He was fine. I don't know if anybody having complaints. I didn't, and I left not because of any disagreement. I left because I always looked for the opportunity. If there was more money somewhere else, I was gone. So and I remember because I left about the same time, another assistant named Bill Good, who moved to Lafayette, left. And I remember after, because Good had already announced he was leaving, and then I went in to tell Mr. Richardson I'm leaving, and he said, "What's going on?" But I'd always called him Mr. Richardson, by the way, even after I was elected DA. But
I think everybody did, as far as that goes. Charles Lindsay, he was sort of the top dog. He was a very good trial lawyer.
Yeah, he was, and Charles was the one. I remember the big case at that time when I was an assistant, and even later when I was in the public defender office. They had indicted the Shreveport Police Commissioner, George Doitos, and Charles was handling that, and that was a big deal at the time.
Right. Lots of publicity in that case.
Yeah.
It's interesting you commented about you starving and moving into the DA's office. As it turned out, I took your place in the DA's office, and I also thought it was a financial opportunity at the time, just as you.
Right.
So, the dynamics that came about, and you ran for DA. I think that was around in '78. Would that be, or
No,
'77 or '78?
Yeah, 78 for sure. But I was in the DA's office and then left in a public defender until '77, the end of '77, and and that's when we all found out that John Richardson was going to retire. And I was the chief of the public defender office, and had never thought about running for DA. The word was way back in the day that Charles Lindsay was going to be the next DA. Fred Sexton was going to be sheriff, but he became a judge. And a guy named Joe Body was going to be the chief of police or something. But anyway, and I saw things like that over the years where people were planning the future of who would get elected, who would do whatever, and none of them ever seemed to work out. In fact, when John Richardson decided to retire, it was qualifying week for the DA to announce he's running. And I remember being in court as a public defender, and an old friend of mine, Henry Walker, comes walking in. He did a lot of defense work, criminal defense work, and Henry came up to me and he said, "Paul, do you think Richardson's not going to run again?" I said, "I have not heard anything that would lead me to believe he's not running. He's not going to qualify and run for re-election." And Henry said, "Well, I'm going up to the fifth floor and ask him." And I found out later that Henry did go up and ask him, and kind of surprised him. And Henry came back and told me that John didn't know for sure, but he was going to announce on Monday what he was going to do. And in those days, we had a week to qualify. There were, all the 6-year term people, the judges and all of that. And at the time, we also had a big election going on for the new form of government in Shreveport. We were going to have a new mayor, a new city council, everything was changing. Even a longtime congressman had announced his retirement, and Buddy Roma and a number of people were running. I tell people later, I said that was in '78. Roma ran and got beat. He later came back and got beat by Buddy Leach, who had a young lawyer working for him named Jim McCrary. And it was.
And it was Joe Wagner that did not run again.
Right, yeah. And so that was a long time seat that had come open, and then and like I say, we all thought that John Richardson was running again. Interesting fact that I found out much later was that the DAs and John had announced he came back and announced on Monday he wasn't running, and endorsed one of his assistants, Larry Johnson. And everybody said, "Wait a minute, he didn't own the office." Yeah. Well, he endorsed him. Well, it was perfectly legal and fine to do that, to announce or not. But I later remember doing some research on that, some years later, that office had always been handled that way. Somebody would be an assistant DA, a guy named Ed Bloor, who's a lawyer here. His daddy, or his grandfather, I think, was an assistant DA, and John Richardson was his first assistant. When he announced he was retiring, he endorsed Richardson at the last minute usually, and where nobody else could get it together to run. And the one before Bloor, I think, had done it that way. I had all that in a little history at one time, but I didn't know. But so it was always kind of handed down.
Well, it's kind of funny you talk about the history, because I had always heard that Charles Lindsay wanted to be DA after Richardson.
Yes,
but a judgeship came open, and allegedly Charles had asked Mr. Richardson if he's going to run again, and supposedly Richardson said yes. So Charles ran for judge, and then it just so, and that was somebody else had retired or something, so it was an empty seat that had to be filled. And it just so happened the stars aligned for you to run against somebody who was not an incumbent, although in the office.
Yeah, and that's true. I was in the office at the time Charles decided to run. I remember him having a meeting, a private meeting with Richardson, and he came out and said, "Well, he's running again, so I'm going to run for this judgeship." And and Fred Sexton, who would have been a candidate for DA, had already been elected judge.
Right.
And both of them were not planning on leaving. In fact, when Mr. Richardson decided that he was not running, I had, in fact, back up a little bit, the weekend before qualifying week for judges and DAs and whatnot, I had gone to South Louisiana for a Carmouche reunion, and I had met a bunch of people, and probably the most political of the cousins, and I had 40 first cousins on the Carmouche side, so there was a lot of people. One of them was a guy named Eddie Carmouche, and Eddie was the political. Eddie had a big firm in Lake Charles. It was Camp Carmouche. Had offices in Lake Charles and Washington, D.C., and maybe in Baton Rouge. But I saw Eddie at that reunion, and he asked me, he said, "Paul, we always thought you were going to be the politician." I said, "Nah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not running for judge or anything." I said, "Maybe in the future I might run for judge or something." But he said, "Yeah, that's surprising me." But anyway, I'm driving back to Shreveport that Monday, which is also qualifying week, and I hear on Keel Radio that longtime DA John Richardson has announced that he's retiring, and he's endorsed one of his assistants, Larry Johnson, for that office. And everybody assumed, well, that's it. Larry's going to be the DA. And I remember asking my then wife that, I ought to run for that. And I think she said, well, But anyway, and then when I got back to Shreveport, I had some phone calls from lawyers. One of them, whom was Bill Fleming, we went to his funeral recently. Bill and I were longtime friends. He was not a criminal lawyer, but Bill said, "You hear about Richardson?" I said, "Retiring and him announcing that he's going to support Larry." I said, "Yeah, I did hear that." He said, "You ought to run." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, let me think about that." And then I got another call from a lawyer that thought the same way. And I said, "Well, there's a groundswell here." I mean, no, but anyway, people were thinking about it, but nobody knew who I was at the time. I was from South Louisiana, no real connections here other than the Looney family, and I was here for 9 years at that point, I think, from '69 to '78. And next thing I know, I started talking. Ron Weems was one. And Ron was very supportive and said, "Maybe you ought to put together a little something."
Yeah.
And Richard Neeson was a good friend that I did legal work for. And Ivan Smith, who everybody knows Ivan. At the time, Ivan was a small furniture owner. His daddy had a furniture store, and he took over all of that. But a few people, and they all were very encouraging. Ronnie Parnell, who was insurance guy. So we started talking about it, and by Wednesday, we decided I was going to run. And no money, no real support, no, but and how you going to do it? I called my father, I remember, and he said, "Well, what do you got to lose?" I said, "Well, really nothing. The people at the public defender office say that I could take a leave and they without pay and run." So I was gambling, but I did it, and the campaign was very interesting, but we worked hard on that. The stars were aligned, I guess, but the polls were showing I wasn't going to win. And in that, of course, we didn't have any money to run polls, so we didn't know. But I remember when I first got in and qualified, people were saying, "Well, who is this guy?" One of the most interesting things was later on in that campaign, when I was talking to people and knocking on doors and looking for support, a lot of them said, "We elected DA?" I said, "Yeah, you do. You wouldn't know because you never
already
had
been sort of anointed in the past." Well, I recall at the time, and you'd mentioned earlier, there were a lot of elections that fall.
Yeah.
There were Senate elections. There was the sheriff's race, and Bennett Kitchens ran.
Yeah.
And you garnered, and Richard Neeson ran for Senate, if I'm not.
No, that was later.
Okay.
Richard, I used to tell people always said, "Well, Neeson got you elected." No, I got it. Neeson helped me get elected. And a year later, I think, the state 4-year terms were up, and Richard decided he was going to run, and I helped him get elected. But Richard was a close friend, still a close friend to this day.
But you were close to a lot of law enforcement, too, at the time.
Yeah, because I had been working in city court, taking all those cases. I remember some interesting things that took place. I remember John Snell, who was a detective at the Shreveport Police, and Snell that we had a case. It's off the subject. We had a case. I had filed a motion to suppress because Snell had arrested some young boys who were riding around breaking car windows, and he had no probable cause down the line to stop them and arrest them. But and I remember we went to city court, tried that case, and I said, well, Mr. Snell, Detective Snell, how did you get the probable cause to stop these people? He said, well, I drove by them, and they looked at me and they looked away. I said, that was it? That's your probable cause? We joked about that when, he worked as a security guard later. And I used to...
Well, you fortunately did win that race, became the DA, and then you served
30 years.
30 years.
5 6-year terms.
You never had any opposition?
Not after that first battle. And the first battle was enough. I mean, that with me and Larry. And Larry he was a very nice guy. And in fact, I remember some older lady saying when we were both speaking about the election, and she said, well, that y'all are two nice-looking young men. And Larry was always just as nice as he could be, I think. Although, I don't know if Larry would have wanted that job after he got it, because it took a lot of time and effort. Not that he couldn't have done it, I think, but I think he would have come under a lot of pressure. I was able to slip by a lot of that, but once I got in that office, and we had a lot of changes, a lot of things to do that needed to be done immediately, and I think back on that, and I think I should have never left there. Now it was time to leave, but I loved that job. I loved it. Loved everything about it. I loved, working with the assistants, hiring people, and doing those things. Going out and talking to community groups about the criminal justice system, because you realize if you go out and speak to all these different clubs, Rotaries, and all those things, you realize how many people really don't have an appreciation or the knowledge of what goes on in criminal justice, not just the DA's office.
The situation over those 30 years is the office really grew a lot, and it had a lot of different needs for change, and starting in the 80s and 70s too, but you had a proliferation of drug cases, juvenile court changed, and you brought a lot of change to the office in that regard.
Yeah, I did, and necessary changes, you see. And up until that time, I believe most of the people in criminal justice positions, DAs, sheriffs, judges, they all believed that the system could not function without plea bargaining. And that became a rallying cry, I think, for people that were against plea bargaining and those that were for. Because I can recall when after getting elected, going to my first state DA association meetings, they were saying, they were all on me all the time. You can't work without plea bargaining. You can't work without doing this. And I'm saying, well, I said, I'm not lying to the public when I say we're not gonna plea bargain, because we had to. But I said what I would say and publicly say is, we're not going to plea bargain. We're going to charge bargain. What we're going to do when a case comes in, we're going to evaluate it and decide: is this a hard felony? Is this a misdemeanor? What would we accept? If we would accept a misdemeanor, we're going to bill it as a misdemeanor. And then we don't have to plea bargain. We bill it as a misdemeanor and plea as charged, or go to trial. And and that was a concept that took a little while for people to understand. I know the judges were not happy when I said we're not going to take a lot of pleas. We're gonna do these things. In fact, I got called to the judges' chambers a few times about that policy that we had put in at the time. Now, I'm not sure all the assistants followed that or not, but that was technically the policy.
Now, and when you got started, I believe there were only 2 criminal courtrooms at that time. We had the large courtroom down on what I call the east end of the courthouse on the 2nd floor.
Yeah.
And then we had a small courtroom just off the elevators when you were straight ahead. And they built that small courtroom maybe just before you came on as the DA.
Probably. I think it was still referred to as the new courtroom of what. And I tried to go back into on the website of First Judicial District Court and go back to '78 and try to see how many were there, but it probably wasn't any more than that. And I know, see, the courthouse, all of that got enlarged because the DA's office, way back when I started in the early '70s, the DA's office was on the 2nd floor, and then got moved to the 5th. At the time, the coroner's office was on one of the top floors. The crime lab was up there. I mean, everything was all crammed into the courthouse.
The
Second Circuit had the whole 6th floor. Yeah. So that.
And there were a lot of judges on the 2nd floor offices. You used to.
Oh yeah.
They just walk right out of their office to the courtroom.
Right. That's right. And that all expanded drastically because there were 8 assistants in '78 when I started, or '79 when I was sworn in. There were 12 assistants, I think, at that time, and I'm not sure whether there was one of those 12 was handling either juvenile or criminal, handling the criminal court, and one of the assistants was the attorney for the police jury at the time, which is now the Caddo Commission. And we later got fired from that job, which I was happy to get. No, I think the commission decided we need our own lawyer. We don't need the DA. I said, good, hire somebody. And the school board did the same. We used to represent the school board, and they wanted their own lawyers.
A lot of smaller parishes still do it, though.
Oh, yeah, they absolutely. The DA does all of that.
When you came in, you initially kind of pursued the idea that you would try cases too.
Yeah.
I recall.
And I did.
You did, yes, you did. But
tried one against you.
That's true. That's true. And when I was a DA, I had one against you when you were an assistant. Public defender. Now. But the office the administrative obligations of the office really consumed your time. Is that fair to say?
It grew that way, and none of us, everything just kind of expanded. You couldn't stop it; it was just going. And I thought that I know that. In fact, I went back some years ago and looked to see. I believe I tried 18 cases as DA. All of them were major cases, I think, and we some first degree, some going for the death penalty, and that sort of case. I didn't go try a burglary, but and I remember over the years looking around, and no other DA, for example, Orleans, Baton Rouge, Monroe, the DAs weren't trying cases, and I was, and I did until late in. I've tried 2 the first year, 2 the second year, and 2 and 2, and then when it got to the point where, hey, we're too big and we need somebody doing this. I remember when I decided it was time to run the office and not try cases. I was handling, I think it was a major child murder or something, and I was, really kind of struggling along in a motion, pretrial motion for that case. And Howard Fish, he was the first assistant at the time, was sitting watching. At the end of the trial, Howard came to me and said, "You need to give me that file." And I said, "You're right." And because I was spending too much time with the politics and the budget and hiring and firing and all of that was going on. So I said, "You know what, Howard, you're right."
And Howard was always direct, but he was a good guy.
No, he was, of all the assistants I had, I think he was probably the best one. And that's not to take away from Marty Stroud and some of the other people that we had that I had as first, Jane Stewart, that I had as first assistant. But Howard was no politics, no bull. He would tell me, he was completely loyal. If there was a question about a case, and I said, "How will you think?" He would say, you can't do what you're talking. And even if he knew I wanted to do.
That's what I meant by saying direct.
Yes, very direct. But if I said, "No, Howard, I want to do it that way," he would do it. I mean, he was loyal, but he knew the law, backwards and forward, the criminal law. And Marty was always smart as he could be, and James handled a lot of cases. Of course, James was pointing to the district judgeship, but that doesn't mean he didn't do it. But he handled them, his cases well too. And I'm not sure whether Dale Cox was ever first assistant or not. He was one of the top after those guys had left, I think.
I don't think he was the first assistant until Charles Cox.
Charles,
right?
Yeah.
Of course, Dale kind of left and came back.
Yeah, a number of times.
Right.
Dale left and went into practice, came back, and Woody, everybody assumed would be the first. Woody Nesmith would be a first assistant, but Woody wanted to be DA so bad that, and I've told him that since. But
I think everybody knows that.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us about, during your being the DA, any of your most memorable or notable cases that you may recall?
We had, of course, the one that had the most publicity was the Lewis Graham case, the PhD science teacher at LSU Med School had killed his wife, and people followed that case all the way. In fact, when we later tried that case in the early '80s, I think, but Jim McMichael, who was one of my good assistants and became a very successful private practice lawyer later. But Jim and I tried that case against Bobby Sutton and one of his partners. Case went on for 21 days, and the courtroom, they had to have slips to get in. They couldn't. Jim and I had to come through the back door to get in, and I said, "Man, we're like rock stars." But we had. It was a very interesting case. Judge C.J. Boland was the judge, and he was always a character anyway. But he'd be up there, he had a gun and stuff with him. But anyway.
Well, that was a brutal homicide where the wife was killed in bed with a hammer.
With a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about it was the blood spatter evidence. I remember Ray Hurd, who was then the director of the Northwest Crime Lab, and I flew up to Illinois to meet with this blood spatter expert, who was quite a character himself. In fact, Howard Fish hated him. But anyway, he explained this stuff. He was looking at the pictures that we had of the blood spatter on the defendant's T-shirt and other places, and we learned a lot about blood spatter during that time, and it was, I think because of that, it made it a little more interesting than just the husband killing wife situation, the blood spatter and whatnot. There was later a book written by a local guy called Blood Evidence, and I remember telling him later, I said, if you'd been a better author, a better writer, I'd have been famous. But I don't know if anybody.
Well, that was one of the, I recall that case being notable because of the blood spatter evidence.
Yeah, that's
We've
right.
not seen that before.
No, nobody had. Now we see some of those things later, and some of the. I saw a program recently where the blood spatter expert was really kind of a, you would call him a whore. Whatever the state wanted him to say, he said. I don't think our blood spatter guy was that way, and he was challenged by the defense very well, and had to stand up to it.
Yeah, Bobby Sutton was a formidable opponent.
Oh yes, he was a good lawyer. I don't know if Bobby's still around or practicing. He may still be practicing.
He's still alive, but I hadn't seen him in a few years.
Yeah,
But,
he was, and one of his partners, Glenn Walker, I think, was. He wasn't a criminal lawyer, but he knew what he was doing.
yeah, he's a very competent lawyer too.
Yeah. So that, and probably another case was this young man who got into the LSU Medical Center, the new building. It was being built, and there was a young Chinese exchange student that was there working on her PhD, and he raped her and threw off the building. I mean, it was horrible.
Right.
We had, that was the case. That might have been one of my last, I don't know if it was one of the last cases, but Don Hathaway Jr., who's now a judge, and I tried that case. In fact, Don was telling me the other day, yeah, I got that conviction for you. I said, come on, Don. I said, your daddy was in the audience because he wanted to see you do your first case. And I was.
And his dad was former sheriff.
Yeah, former sheriff.
Okay.
Yeah.
And during your term, there was a lot of changes. I recall in innovations, you created a screening section, a drug section. You brought in an office administrator. You brought in investigators. You created an appellate section, child support.
Yeah.
All those things.
All those things kind of came along, and it was just a matter of, this is something we need to do. I remember the pretrial diversion in drug cases. I guess we were one of the first to have that. I remember going to a DA's conference in somewhere out of state, and them talking about the pretrial diversion. And there were a number of reasons for that, for having something like that. And one that I, being political, I'm sitting there saying, you got all these young, wealthy people getting put in diversion, or get informally put in diversion rather than prosecuted. And I said, so, we could get attacked for not making that available to any defendant, black, white, rich, or poor. And that's when we started more formal proceedings with the pretrial diversion. And that way, people couldn't come in and say, well, Carmouche's friends get diversion, and the others don't. But that was, I always had that in the back of my mind for all decisions. In fact, I may have said in front of you before, when you were in as an assistant, may have said, anytime you reduce a plea, or reduce a charge to something other than what it's charged as, there needs to be a reason, and it needs to be a reason that would be acceptable to the public if it's on the front page of the Shreveport Times. Right. Of course, we don't have that anymore, but we.
That is the Shreveport Times.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we do, but we.
Yeah. I get it still. It comes in the mail 3 days after. But so that was one. I think, and a lot of things came about because of people causing or complaining or whatever. And I remember we had the problem with white collar cases. I can remember meeting with big business owners who had an employee or somebody embezzling a bunch of money, sometimes thousands of millions of dollars from them. And sometimes we'd have a case that a normal police investigator not being a CPA or a money man, had trouble following that money trail, and we'd get cases that really weren't prosecutable. We knew who did it, we just couldn't prove they did it. And that was another thing that I believe, even if we know who did a crime, we got to be able to prove they did the crime. That was part of the screening section and part of this. But I was fortunate to have an assistant at the time named Bruce Doris, who's later, he's running some big operation.
He works for a group that forensic examinations by certified public accountants and how catching fraud and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He moved to Austin, Texas. I remember when that was going on, because Bruce came to me and said, "Look, I've got offered this job from these people, and I will probably, because the owner is former FBI agent or something, he's getting up in age, and he's probably going to turn it over to somebody in the office." And he was offered much more money than we were paying him, and he moved to Austin. I said, "You get to move to Austin, you get more money. What are you thinking about?" And he did, and he's last I heard that he may be running it now. But
I think he may be. But he brought the ability to handle financial crimes because he was an accountant, a CPA, and had the ability to understand the financial documents necessary to prove cases, which is
right. And that part, one of the things he did that was extremely important to us was when the police would come, when they had an investigation involving a white collar crime, they would go to Bruce before they ever arrested anybody. They would go to Bruce, and Bruce would approve or disapprove an arrest warrant, or tell them, "Look, we need to do this, this, and this," and then come back. And that made it so much better for the white collar cases. And I, in fact, after I retired and left, I remember telling Charlie Scott, I said, "Charlie," because somebody said that he had done away with white collar. I said, "Charlie, you need to get that running, because that's something that's absolutely necessary." And also politically, the guys that own these big businesses and get a lot of them were lawyers. It was amazing how many law firms had gotten embezzled from, but.
I've seen that. So, over the years, you've had a lot of lawyers come through. I mean, it's pretty well known in the legal area that lawyers come to the DA's office for training and trial work, and oftentimes leave. So, you've seen, I remember Kerry Shemp, you mentioned Jim McMichael.
Oh, we had, and I wished I had kept a list. I didn't, because there had to be hundreds of them that came through.
Cody Mayo, you mentioned Cody.
Yeah. And they, you could look. I mean, one of my partners until recently, when I guess I was kind of spoken for, was John Bokenfold was one of them. I mean, we had just people used to. I used to keep a list of potential people that were always available to hire, men, women, blacks, white, and we one of the selling points was, I would tell young lawyers from law school, 2 places you need to go if you want to be a trial lawyer. If you don't want to be a trial, don't worry about this, but if you want to be a trial lawyer, you need to come to the DA's office first. If you can't get there, you need to go to the public defender office, because you're going to be in court in either of those places all the time.
Right.
And you get very comfortable trying cases.
As we sit here and we talk about lawyers that have worked for you, I recall a story about you and Cody Mayo arguing a case before the Louisiana Supreme Court. And I think it would be appropriate if you can recall that, because I think there was an issue involved about what you said in closing argument.
Yeah.
And I believe Cody would argue. Could you tell us, if you recall, what exactly how that went down?
I recall it, but I'm trying to remember what it was I said. Something I said, according to the defense lawyer, who later became a judge, Judge Jeanette Garrett, who was defending that case, and smart as a whip, and she caught it immediately. But I think I had somewhere or other, according to them, alluded to his failure to testify, the defendant's failure to tell his side of the story. And anyway, the objection would go to this back then, all appeals of a conviction, a district court, would go to the Supreme Court. It didn't go through the Second Circuit. But I remember I wasn't at the Supreme Court, but Cody was down there to handle it. And somebody said, and what happened was, when the judge said, one of the judges questioned him and said, "Why would Carmouche do that?" And Cody said, "I don't know. I don't know. I told him not to." I said, "Wait a minute."
That was the story.
Yeah. But, anyway, we got around it, I think, on what you and your people do now, harmless error. But
that was always quite a story.
It was, that's just one of Cody. Another time was arguing, not involving me, but the office it was. He argued a case, and in the closing argument, it was a lawyer that had stolen from his clients. And Cody, in closing argument, said, "There's two lawyers over there." How did he put it? There's two lawyers over there. One of them says, that this is not a crime. The other one, I forget how it went, but anyway, made it the defense lawyer, who was Welbert Jack Jr., drove him nuts. He said, one of them took the money, and the other one saying it was okay.
That was basically his closing argument.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, towards the end of your career, at one point in time, you decided to run for the U.S. Congress.
Yeah, I was looking back at that, still trying. I had never intended. I never said, like I've said, over the years, I've watched all these people saying, well, so-and-so is going to be a judge, so-and-so is going to be DA, or so-and-so. I never really planned on that, being a congressman. And in the middle of that campaign, I'm saying, why am I even running for this? Well, I don't want to be a congressman, one of 440 members. But anyway, what happened was, and I didn't know Jim McCrary was going to retire at that time. I don't think I did anyway. He had been congressman for 20 years, and I don't know if he had very little opposition over those 20-year period, and had raised a lot of money, and was a good congressman. He'd done. But after I decided when I was going to retire from the DA's office, I decided I'm not going to wait till the last minute. I'm not going to try to hand it down to whoever I think should have it, the office, as had been done in the past. And so I announced in March of that year, which gave people, some number of months to decide who's running, who's gonna take it. I did believe at the time that Scott Creighton was going to run, because he'd always talked about running for DA. But I announced in March, and at that point, and then a month later, so Jim McCrary, if I'm not mistaken, said he was not going to run again. And I started getting some phone calls from people that said, Carmouche, we're looking at this district. And although it's been a Republican district for these my Democratic friends, although it's been a Republican district for years, I think there was some new changes in that district, the district lines, and they said it looks like a Democrat could win that. And I remember Charlie Malasaw, who is from Napoleonville, where I grew up, and I knew Charlie. He was the congressman from that area for maybe 4 terms, 4 years or so. And Charlie called me and said, "Oh, look, people want to talk to you about maybe you running." And I said, "Charlie, I never thought about it. I don't think I want to do that." And I told him flat out no. And then, over a period of time, not that long, a number of people were asking me about it. And I was talking to my wife, Marty, and I said, "What do you think if I run for this?" She said, "Well, it's expensive to live in Washington." She had seen these stories of congressmen living in their offices and stuff. I said, "Well, the difference here is I have 33 years in DA's retirement. I got a good retirement. And the salary." I said, "I'll tell you what, you run Shreveport on the DA's retirement, I'll go to Washington and we'll spend whatever the salary is on housing and living there," which would have been great. But she never was that excited about it. And which, once I decided I was going to run, then we were all in. But I never knew how much money a congressman has to raise each year. All I did in that campaign, unlike the DA's campaign where I was out shaking hands, I was on the phone all day, almost every day, raising money. Raised $1 million. That wasn't near enough. And I'm saying, God, I don't know if I'm going to like this at all.
Well, you were in a pretty good position. You had real high name recognition at that point in time. And I had heard stories of as much as 93% of the public knew who you were.
Yeah.
And but then I believe there was a hurricane or something.
Yeah, and that was the thing I was thinking. Still, a Democrat would have trouble getting elected unless the voter turnout was high. And when I decided to run, Hillary Clinton was, everybody assumed, was going to be the Democratic nominee for president. And I was going to draw a lot of people out. But then when Barack Obama beat her and got to be the candidate, I said, "Well, this is over. I'll win this because we're going to get all those extra people that voted." And in the primary, which should have been the general, because we got pushed back. In the primary, I was looking at my Wikipedia page. I got 93,000 votes. The guy that I was running against only had 60,000. But the 93,000 votes that I had was more votes than Fleming and whoever else was in that, the young guy from up here. Their vote total combined was about 70,000. I got 93,000. I beat them both. That time we were going to walk in, but the hurricane came and pushed us back. It was ill-fated for me, but as I tell people, I said sometimes, the good Lord protects you against your own ego, because I always thought I could win everything, and that turned out and I lost the general election when it was just me and Fleming, who was from Minden, Webster Parish. By the way, I beat him in Webster Parish in that race, and I lost by 360 votes in total, and
that's close.
Yeah, real close.
And then I guess you retired from the DA's office that year, and then you moved on into private practice for a while.
Yeah, and that had always been the plan, because I was associated with Weems, Shemp, Gilso, that group, where I had kind of had some part-time legal work with them over the years, but I was going to go there. I always had planned to go there, not running for Congress, but after the loss in Congress, I went there just to see, I'd always thought I have all this experience as a trial lawyer, and I've never really been a lawyer in private practice hardly, because that first 3 years with the retired city judge. But and I always thought, how would you do? So anyway, I wanted to do that, and had I been, and I did that for a while. But then I know that because I was basically a criminal lawyer, criminal defense lawyer, I noticed that I was kind of out of the loop because I was doing only civil cases. And the reason for that was we had some state work the Attorney General had assigned to that firm. And I don't know how many, I think other lawyers violate this provision, but we knew that if you're doing state work through the Attorney General's office, you can't do any criminal defense. And I'm saying, I don't know this civil law, and I got to work too hard and study too hard to take these cases. And finally, I ended up going off on my own, with just my office doing criminal. So I wasn't associated with the firm, but and enjoyed that for a while. But as I tell people today, they say, "Are you retired or not?" And I'm saying, "Well, I'm retired, and I should have done it 10 years ago." But
well, Paul, we talked a lot about your accomplishments as a DA. Did you have any disappointments that you can think of?
Well, that congressional election was, because that was, that up until then, you always think, I'm sure Sheriff Prater might be thinking about this same thing at this time. I used to think I'm unbeatable, But one of the disappointments that I have is, I've always thought that as DA, you're a very powerful person. You can destroy people if you want to. You can, and you gotta be careful how you handle your cases, and you can't let politics decide that. You can't let friendships decide that. You've got to treat everybody equally. And as a defense lawyer, I've found, since I retired and was doing criminal defense all around here, Bossier, Webster, DeSoto, Alexandria, in some of those cases, I'm saying, that some of these DAs are not handling their cases properly. They're not evaluating them. They're not getting rid of it. If a case is not good, they shouldn't be making the accused or the defense lawyer spend a lot of time and money trying to prove that they didn't commit the crime. That's one of my main disappointments. And I think back on, well, if I happened to be a good DA, why was I better than these other guys, men and women that are DAs now? And I think the key to that is I was a public defender, I was an assistant DA, I was the head of the public defender office, so I saw it from both sides. And then when I came back out, I was back in on the other side, as some of my DA buddies call it, back on the dark side. But and when you think about it, when I got elected DA, I just happened to have experience in criminal and prosecution. But most DAs don't. I mean, imagine it's been in civil law practice. Next thing you know, they're the DA, and they're making very important decisions on the lives of people that are involved. And we don't have any kind of requirement that a DA know or be involved.
Well, I feel fortunate. I've been around for a long time in regard to connection with the DA's office, and we've had fortune in this parish of having DAs that have had a lot of criminal experience, like you. Charles Scott was a drug court judge and did a lot of criminal trials, and James Stewart, of course, ADA, district judge, and
Sure.
appellate court judge,
Sure.
and brings a lot to the
Yeah,
table.
this was not pointed at Caddo.
No, I'm not saying, I didn't mean to
Yeah.
link that in that category, but I agree with you wholeheartedly that it's, discretion is a
Yeah.
big issue with the district attorney in regards to bringing charges. And many times in today's world, the public does not understand
Oh, no.
how that discretion needs to be used. They feel like everybody, if you're arrested, you should be prosecuted.
Right, right.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes, and that's one of the reasons why, and I tell new DAs and that you've got to take every opportunity that you can to meet with interest groups, Rotaries, and all those different kinds of people. It gives you a chance to say, this is what we do up there, and this is why we do what we do. And you also get feedback from the public about, why don't you know, I remember every time I'd go to a meeting, a public meeting, and they said, why don't you locking everybody up? And I would take the opportunity to say, well, let me tell you, you may not realize this, but we in Louisiana and probably in Caddo are the best in the world at locking people up. If you look at the per capita people in jail versus the national records, we lock up people. And I said, if you want to spend the money, build me another jail the same size as the one we got to, and we could double it. I said, I'll tell you, within a couple of months, we could fill that one too, because we're the best in the world at filling them. But so that is a misunderstanding with the public, because criminal justice is much more complicated than people realize. And it's important that you have people that are willing to you know, go out on a limb, not just say, you know, when I first got elected, I first ran, I was tough, law and order. You know, after a few years in the office, I realized, wait a minute, you know, and then when I started getting the FBI bulletins about how per capita we put more people in jail in this state than anywhere else, you start looking around saying, wait a minute, why, we're not that bad. We're not the worst people in the world here.
And a lot of that was brought about by mandatory sentencing in the 80s too.
Yeah, and that
which changed the law dramatically.
Yeah, and in federal court, it's worse. Yeah. I think the mandatory sentence is taking all the discretion away from the judge, or almost all, even though they say it's not mandatory, it's advisory. But heck, they follow those guidelines, and you get. In fact, I asked after I retired, and I did a little bit of criminal defense, started doing some criminal defense over there. I mean federal court, and who, by the way, the U.S. Attorney's Office would let us train the people and then hire them away. But
they still do.
Yeah, I know. And we, you know, arguing against those guidelines, it was just, you know, impossible. And that took that discretion away. And I always thought, you know, we need. At one time, I was an advocate of, we need appointed judges, lifetime judges. But then I'm saying, wait a minute, we need somebody that has to answer to the public more than this.
There's always two sides to the
coin.
coin.
Yeah, yes, yes.
Well, Paul, it's been very enjoyable talking with you this morning, and we appreciate your time and appreciate it. I'm sure the Archives Committee will appreciate what you've had to tell us this morning.
Well, great. Thank you. I'm very happy to be able to have the chance. As I say, always, to the new DAs, I always go to the public and tell them what's going on. And I had to face some tough meetings, and you know, after maybe a police shooting or whatever, that you know, that was part of the job, though, I thought. And I'm not sure if DAs are doing that enough. Not James or others, but you got to explain to mad people.
Police shootings are one of the more difficult problems in the area of prosecution.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because you want to support the police, but then again, you got to uphold the law.
Yeah, yeah, and you got to be able to explain if the police were right, they're right. If they were wrong, they're wrong. And,
Yeah. Thank you a bunch.
All right, man.